Peace and blessings, everyone. Welcome to Religiously Nerdy, and we are here with Thalib Razi to, talk about his book and things that he does, and just nerdy stuff in general. Um, and yeah, so I'm Toyin Yusuf, and Toby and Elizabeth
Toby.
are here also. And yeah, we're back after a kind of break from a crazy summer and
Yes.
it was ridiculous, but we're back and excited and ready to kick off the fall. All right, so first, Thalib, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself and something you're currently nerding about?
Okay, so Assalamu alaikum everyone. Peace to all of you. My name is Thalib. I am a Sri Lankan American. I live in Atlanta, Georgia right now, but I've lived in DC and in the Midwest before. And so what I do is I predominantly tell stories through writing and through music. Those are my two sort of passions, right? Two passions are writing novels and writing songs. And in both cases, I'm heavily inspired by my faith of Islam and also from world culture. So I like learning about cultures from different parts of the world and then incorporating them both into my music and then into my noveling as well. And something I'm nerding about right now for sure is the Rings of Power series that has come about. And there's a lot of connection to that and the story that I've written, because you can see how when, the Lord of the Rings was kind of taken in a more multicultural direction, there's been a lot of controversy about it. And that got me thinking, right now, what I've been nerding out a lot is looking like deeper into the Lord of the Rings lore and to see exactly like almost like from Islamic perspective, like what's the dalil, what's the proof? What did Tolkien actually say about, different races and cultures and how they can be sort of honestly in universe incorporated into what he had envisioned. So that's what I've been nerding out a lot about.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, great. Perfect timing, I would say. And I mean, me personally, I haven't started reading or watching the Rings of Power because I felt like I needed to really like read and watch all the stuff earlier before I get into it. Because I've watched the movies. I didn't watch The Hobbit, but I did read The Hobbit. It's weird. So I just like need to like refresh everything. I feel like I would enjoy it better, you know. There's also just a lot of TV happening right now that is just overwhelming.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
That's another conversation. Yeah. So that's really great. So the book was amazing. I'm disappointing ending, but I'm waiting for the next book already. But there's that. So so before we get into it, so firstly, what was your motivation behind writing your book?
So it is very connected to your like podcast title of being a religious nerd, in that like I grew up, very immersed in my Muslim values and my faith. And then I also grew up being super nerdy. Like I would play Dungeons and Dragons with my friends.
Yes.
Reading Lord of the Rings. And most of my friends were white at that time. The school that I went to, it happened that also Midwestern Indiana, like most of the kids, they were white and they were also quite religious. There was a Mennonite kid who was very religious and very into even his dad was very into medieval culture. So, he was raised with both religion and kind of fantasy nerd stuff, since he was a kid. And a lot of the kids were kind of similar, but the one difference would be culture. Even though we all had religious values, when it came time to play our board games, they could see themselves very easily in the in D&D you actually have like a category called good, right, and neutral and evil. And typically the good guys would have, Thor's son, Odin's son, Norse kind of sounding names, and they would be of the human race or the high elf race or fair elf race or certain races. And then the evil guys would have names like Khaga, a lot of Khas and Gas in their names. And they would be of darker complexion, and they would wield curved swords, and they had curved noses, and the writers of these D&D plots or novels that were basically taking inspiration from Tolkien, a lot of them were just looking for a culture that was different from theirs, because they're the bad guys. They want them to be the other, right? And then it just happened that they would pick kind of more Eastern and Oriental sounding names. And that, it was even there in Lord of the Rings itself with like the Haradrim. And so I started wondering, asking myself what the question of, what if that story was just the perspective of one side of a big war that happened, and they themselves, the fair elves or the free folk, were just one way of them looking at the world, sort of like how Europeans looked at colonialism or the Crusades, or how they looked at it over history, and that kind of being like a flawed view, that there wasn't one side that was all good, these sort of hodgepodge bands of free folk gathering together against one hegemonic empire, kind of like the Ottoman Empire or something, if you will, and then defeating them and carving them up into little pieces. To me, that felt a little bit like, maybe that was just one perspective. Maybe there was another perspective of the people who had lost, and they said, they were living their life freely, and that they weren't as barbaric as the elves and the humans sort of made them out to be. So that's what got me started, and then I started with the idea of a good goblin. Like, the title of the first chapter is a random encounter, which is like, when you play Dungeons and Dragons the first time, you always run into this weak, low-level goblin who you just have to crush to get your experience points. And so I asked myself, what if he was the good guy? What if he was the protagonist of the story? And so I went with there and then kind of created a world around that.
I like the protagonist a lot, because when I first saw it, I was like, I didn't know. I thought the drunk guy that we first encounter was going to be the protagonist.
Exactly.
Where are we going with this story? Like, is it going to be like one of those big burly guys that's going to be the leader of our story? But then we meet our goblin that I'm sure we get into later with our next question. But like, we meet the goblin, and I'm like, oh, I'm picking up some stuff here. I'm picking up things with his name and like the things that he's saying and his mannerisms and his faith. And I was like, okay. And all his messages in group chat, like,
so similar to Islam, I could just tell. Yeah.
Isn't it nice just to know all the references of something
you're mentioning?
You're reading?
I understood the joke.
Literally every single thing relating to this, I was like, yep, highlighted.
It felt so good.
Yeah.
So could you briefly explain more about the world and the lore in this book? Because for me, I've also been a huge D&D fan, so like seeing all of this is the idea of D&D. So can you explain more about it?
Sure. So the idea of it is a coin-shaped planet. So it's spinning around like a coin would if you spun it. And there's an eastern side, and there's a western side, and then there's sort of a rim in the middle. And there's a cloud that covers it, which is sort of a source of magic and sort of mysticism, which is called the mist. So the head side of the planet, or the west, is the land of the fair elves. They're sort of culturally similar to Europeans and sort of white people generally. The middle, you have the northern part of the rim, which is the cold, icy place, which is where the dwarves live. And they're sort of inspired a lot by Arab and Middle Eastern cultures. And then further south along the rim, you have the land of the dark elves, or the Odabi. And the Odabi are predominantly inspired by Black African cultures, but specifically from my wife's culture, which is Oromo from Ethiopia. So kind of Horn of Africa inspired culture. Then the east is the Goblin lands, which is Azulistan. And at the bottom of Azulistan is an island called Serendipitia, which is where in that one, so the Goblins in general are inspired by Asian cultures, Turkic, Central Asian, as well as further south, in going down to the island. Serendipitia is actually my culture of Sri Lanka. So inspired by Sri Lanka.
Cool. Cool to hear.
Sri Lanka is an island,
yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And can you tell more about the race, like a little more about the races?
Oh, sure, yeah. I didn't want to because I feel like I could just nerd out too far just the whole episode. But right, so there's those races, and I guess I should give some background on the history. So those people, they're all descend from one they're all one species. They're called the kin, and they all descend from the Darkin, from the Odabi. They sort of spread from there, and they spread around the coin, and then the coin they sort of forgot that the coin was a coin. After a while in history, the people in the Elfland, fair Elflands, they just thought their planet was a sphere, or they didn't know really what their planet looked like. The people on the rim also didn't really, venture out, and the goblins were probably, somewhat aware, but kind of like China, they knew about the whole world, but they didn't want to go there. They just were good where we are at. And then what happened was the fair elves sort of had a revolution against their kingdom when they discovered that the planet was a coin, and that prompted sort of an exploration of the world on their behalf, which triggered a war between between the fair elves and the goblins over this middle place called the subverse, the dwarf and dark elf lands. This triggered what's called the Old War, which is a 1,000-year-long war, where essentially they were fighting over these precious gemstones that are sort of like the oil of their universe, where they can use it to do this powerful new magic called enchanting. And essentially that leads to sort of what's similar to our world's colonialism, in which the fair elves eventually win, destroying the goblin empire that had kind of allied with the dwarves. And after a while, that colonialism also crumbles, and we're left with sort of nation states pretty similar to our world today. And in that world is the world, that's the world that Mizan that he grows up in, and he's from the North Pole, which is essentially a sort of a Mecca plus Jerusalem situation, where it's a holy place for one particular religion called the Way, which is inspired a lot by Islam. But it's holy to people of the Way, but it's also been colonized by the fair elves, and they sort of rule it from its center, and the dwarves who used to live there have been crushed and pushed underground, and there's some symbolism there as well. But that's a sort of a quick rundown of the history of the races and the world. I could go into so many more details about the magic system,
but don't want to be spoiled anything.
But I don't want to do that. Just
that's a great introduction. Yeah, cool history. World building. I really like the whole coin thing, and the stuff that later on we'll find out about the whole controversy of that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, what is something that readers of all people and types should look forward to when reading the book?
I think they can look forward to a world that's very punny. There's lots of puns and jokes.
Yes, serendipity.
Yeah,
all the jokes were
exactly. I mean, I'm just like I've been built for dad joke humor. Like I'm glad I'm a dad now because I've had that kind of all my life. So it's a lot of puns. There's a lot of also banter between the different races, and something I strove for was, to have people sort of have different opinions on what's right and what's wrong, or believing in God or not believing in God, or believing something to be good or something not to be good, and having them just say it and argue it with each other, but not necessarily sort of come to blows with it. Like, there's a lot of, each person, each sort of perspective, a character gets to say it, and then another character gets to kind of counter it or say that they disagree with it. And then it's sort of left there because, I think sometimes, especially if you're writing a Muslim fantasy story, you could tend to, want to show your values or your beliefs, and it could be preachy. But what I aim for is something that's not preachy. Like, I want to showcase my values and stay true to them, but I also want someone who's not Muslim can read this book, and I've had several, non-Muslim readers who have read it and really enjoyed it because they just got the perspective without feeling that it was being forced upon them. So there's this isn't a story that's sort of trying to make you believe a certain thing, but it's just about making you look at the world in a different way, probably than you typically see it in a fantasy story. So I'd say, humor and puns and sort of a good pace and action, as well as kind of an interesting perspective and a lot more multicultural. If you've been reading fantasy and you started to think to yourself, I want to see another culture represented. I want to learn more about, Indian or Asian culture or African culture or Arab culture, as well as European culture in the fantasy context, then this is definitely the book for you.
Yeah, I love
I
that.
do
It's great.
know.
Go ahead.
I do know that the character Apple was very interesting.
Yeah.
That was like one of those like, oh, characters will not follow the way, but has like a different perspective on things. So that's really cool that we had like that.
Yeah. Yeah, like they're foils for each other, you know. Some people, you know, like they get to argue their different points to each other, and you know, they sort of that's been an easy way. That was an easy. The different characters were an easy way for me to you know, explore arguments, because one guy will say something and then the other one will disagree with it. So you kind of get both sides of any argument there.
Yeah, and there's also other cool characters like Nick, like I guess friend that he had growing up, and we have Dana. So I do like how he comes from school, you know, after he meets Apple during his time at school, then comes back home, doesn't really get a welcome like when he comes in, which was interesting. But I do really love like the family dynamic that we get going in, you know, with the shop and all of that. So I really like how like everyone can relate to this too, you know, but regardless of culture. So that was really cool to see. And then yeah, so I really like that, enjoying that.
Yeah, the immigrant story, right? Like it doesn't have to only be in a realistic fiction, right? You can have a I mean, why not have a goblin who's also pouring coffee at a coffee shop? Like the idea there is like you know, slice of life. It's not the whole story. The whole story isn't slice of life, but that little bit in there is because, you know, if it's sort of more of a modern fantasy story, even if it's in another world. And you know, part of modern life, I mean, this is the struggles that we go through trying to find a job, trying to decide who we're going to be after we go through school and things like that. So I you know, I feel like I was writing what I knew. Like that's, you know,
definitely
that's the life immigrant, you know, trying to prove himself to his parents. Like that was me, you know. So I think, you know, a lot of fantasy readers want something also that's, you know, relatable to our current, you know, life and society too.
Right. Something that's tangible.
Yeah.
So what has the response to your book been like?
Been good. It's been really good so far. I've been I think you know, the struggle has been sort of getting the word out there about it. So like I really appreciate you guys for even having me on, and for all the people who've shared it, because the people who end up picking it up and reading it from start to finish, or even just reading a little bit of it, they have been really enjoying it, and I've been getting a lot of 5-star reviews on Amazon. Also, you know, sort of hearing from word of mouth, people who really like the ideas and who are looking forward to the sequel, which is really, or to the future books, which is really helping me, because I kind of did this first one as an experiment to see if, you know, this world that I had been building up in my mind, like, is it something that people actually want to hear more about or read more about? And I'm definitely getting encouraged, but I also, you know, think that it's hard as a self-published author to get the word out, and you don't necessarily have that much help. So I think that I would love for a lot more people to hear about it and actually pick it up and try it out, which is my hope. And I also think, you know, as I keep writing them, probably, you know, the word will keep spreading. But so far, everyone who's picked it up has really enjoyed it. So I'm really happy about that.
That's good.
Yeah,
I take English as a major, and my last class was focusing around publishing. And when they started talking about self-publishers, I was like, they have to go through so much when you're doing everything yourself. So you putting out this book, you creating this book, making the book, the cover, and then like marketing, I think you've done a good job of getting it out there even more. I feel like the things that you have moving and the things that are coming will be exciting to see.
Thank you. Inshallah.
Inshallah. Yeah, I was just going to ask that, like, how was it like, you know, self-publishing, even just writing a book, first of all, because that's also already a hard thing to do, I assume. But like,
yeah,
how was it like writing it, getting published, you know, getting like editing and all of that? If you could speak about that.
Yeah, for sure. I'd say, you know, writing it was the most fun part of all, like doing it I sort of had a forcing function because my first son was about to be born, and I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna have no more time. So I just used that and pushed through and finished this book, which I had been, sort of, thinking about it or writing and then rewriting for like years, maybe over a decade. But then actually having it written was the fun and easy part. And then the hard part was I spent a year and a half or so querying agents and kind of getting the sense that it was not the fit for the industry right now. There's a lot of more human-based fantasy and sort of elves and goblins and Tolkien-inspired stuff is kind of seen as not as in phase. I mean, now with Rings of Power,
I mean, like, that's crazy.
maybe it's gonna come right back. But at that time, about a year ago, I sort of was like, I've done a year and a half of this. I think it's got too much of a spiritual Islamic angle. It's probably, people wanted more of just Islamic aesthetics or something rather than the actual like talking about philosophy and stuff like that. So I found that the agenting and the traditional route was, just there's also so many writers, who are agenting these people that get like hundreds of manuscripts in their inbox every day. And so they have to pick the one that has sort of the broadest appeal to everybody. And so after doing that for some time, I sort of decided, this is something that I think will be much better self-published and giving me that sort of freedom and things like that. So I went with that. And then, after self-publishing, after making that decision, it wasn't too much of a challenge to get the sort of template, the formatting and the editing. Most of that I did on my own. I got beta readers to read it, to make sure that an unbiased take on its quality, but editing I did myself. And then the book cover I got from a really awesome Indonesian Muslim artist who really was like perfect because he knew the culture and the things that I was going for. So yeah.
Ooh, you did everything by yourself.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
Go ahead.
So I heard that you're doing a sequel, obviously, but is there any other works you're doing at the moment? Like I heard you're also a musician, so tell us more about that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I guess first about the sequel. So the title I can just kind of give a soft reveal to everybody right now is going to be called the Mystic's Shard. And so the Mystic's Shard, like the Enchanter's Counsel, the Mystic's Shard, I think they're all going to kind of follow that trend. The just a little bit about it that I could say without giving any spoilers is that it's going to be set. So the first book was set in the North Pole of that coin-shaped planet, Friedheim, which is sort of very Middle Eastern influenced in culture. This next book is going to be set in the Mystic Shard is going to be set in Odabia, which is the African sort of inspired part of the country of the world, and it's I won't say. I guess I shouldn't say the reason it's set there because you have to read the first book to find out exactly why. But it's going to involve some interesting things, maybe a little bit of jinn as well, a little bit of there's a little bit of a correlation to the jinn being involved, and still on the same theme of sort of the environmental destruction that the first book explores. It's carrying on, and they're sort of finding that problem that they encounter in the Enchanter's Council is starting to pop up everywhere. That magic is actually causing an environmental, or specifically, I guess that's not a spoiler to reveal that there is a kind of magic in the story that is causing destruction of the environment throughout the world. So it's set in
that in the beginning of the book. Yeah.
What's that?
I think you even see that in the first chapter, and then the way.
Yeah. You exactly. You see it in the first chapter for sure. And so it's set in Odabia and very inspired by East African and sort of the Sahel, like the Horn of Africa and the Sahel cultures. The in Africa is kind of the inspiration for that one. And other projects, I would say, other projects would be, I guess I do have I might even time it that I released this album along with the novel, is that I do have another album inspired. Also, that's the thing, like when you get married, like you really absorb a lot of the other person's culture. So the next book, the next album I have also is very inspired by Ethiopian and Oromo music specifically. So that's where my wife is from, that's her culture. But they have a set of scales, a certain set of musical scales that they use in Ethiopia. So I'm kind of trying to do like one song in every scale. And the title for that one is going to be Earthskin Girl. So it's kind of an earth themed album. Like the past two albums I did were also elemental themed, and that's also a theme in the novel too, is elements. But my first album was called The Fire Inside, also influenced by Ethiopian music. And then the second album was called The Water of Life, and that was very Celtic and Irish kind of music inspired. So this next one, Earthskin Girl, I'm kind of going back to the Oromo and Ethiopian music for a bit.
Would you
That's
ever
my two projects.
Would you ever make a CD that supplements your book?
I suppose this one might be like that. Like they might be released together. Earthskin Girl, the only difference is I'd say, I don't know if I would make like songs that are like about like what you'd say filk, I guess they call it, like folk songs about nerddom. Only because then you would actually have to, you wouldn't be able to appreciate the song unless you'd read the book. And I think that's like a really small audience. You know, I want like my songs to appeal to as many people as can listen to them, and then my books to appeal for everyone who wants to read them. But sometimes people just don't want to read books and they just want to listen to music. So I think when I do release Earthskin Girl, it's not going to be sort of only that you have to read the book in order to understand or to enjoy the song. So I think I'll release them at the same time, but they're not necessarily going to be exactly about the same things.
Cool.
Yeah.
Do you have any, like, is there an estimate of when the next book is coming out, or like?
Let me say, I want to write it this year. Okay. So I recently just turned 29, so I'm hoping that by the time I turn 30, it will be done, it'll be written, and then maybe, you know, that year, inshallah. So next year, it'll be finished writing and then published as well. And, or I'd say published in 2024 then, I guess. So if it's finished by 2023, then published by 2024, inshallah. Maybe sooner. It depends on how much time I have, and you know, I have to do this kind of all like as my side project outside of work and family and things like that. Yeah, but I'm feeling very motivated. That's the beautiful thing. It's like it was hard to get motivated for the first book, but once you've done it, you're like, oh, that wasn't so bad actually, and now the ideas start to flow. So I think I've got a lot of books left in me, inshallah.
Inshallah. And you have a lot of fans already, I'm sure. So they're waiting.
Glad to hear it. I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah.
Great. So do you have any socials that you would like to drop?
Sure.
And where can you find your music as well?
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah,
sure. So the music is all at atrazi.bandcamp.com. And I'm sure y'all can put like how it's spelled and everything like that. The writing, I think the easiest way to follow me is to follow me on Instagram, because I put all the updates for my novel as well as for the writing on there. And that's THALIBRAZI. So that's just my name, is the handle, just at Thalib Razi.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, great.
Any other questions that anyone else have?
Yeah, I'd welcome any questions.
I guess I would say any advice for any Muslims out there who want to be like, who are artists, want to put their work out there and things. I know it's not as easy for like Muslims to do that. So I just want to know if you have any advice for that.
I would say like, never compromise your Islam for your art, and never compromise your art for your Islam, because there's a temptation to do one or the other. Like you want to make there's a temptation to make something corny and preachy just because, you know, to appeal to people's love of Islam. Then there's a temptation to sort of go against the sort of the beliefs and values of Islam in order to appease people who want something daring or something in the art. And I think you want to look at the big picture, like, your spiritual health, but you also want to, a true art at the end of the day is revealing the beauty of the world. And so like the beauty of what God has created. So at the end of the day, if you can get that balance perfectly, if not compromising on your deen and then not compromising on your art, then I think that's amazing, and it's hard to do, but definitely, try your hardest to walk that middle path is what I would say.
Yeah, that's good advice. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, so I can't wait to read the book now. It's so better.
Yeah.
Like, maybe I should just binge read it one day and then just be like,
yep,
finally just do that. But
Awesome.
yeah, also wanted to know if you mentioned you're reading the Lord of the Rings, but what other series like have inspired you? Because I know I've read a lot of fantasy, like we have the Spring series and like the City of Brass series. So any other like series you recommend and stuff?
Well, definitely like series that have influenced me. I'd say like one of my other hugest influences would have to be Discworld by Terry Pratchett. His world on a disc, like spinning like a flat planet, was also part of the inspiration behind the coin that I had. And also the way Terry Pratchett writes is that he's using fantasy to really like talk really specifically about our world, like whether it's movies or technology or he really, he really explored a lot of things using fantasy that nobody else, I think, ever thought to explore. So Terry Pratchett is a huge, sort of inspiration for me. In terms of stuff that I enjoyed City of Brass. That was definitely a great series. Something older that I've just been picking up again was actually the D&D fantasies of R.A. Salvatore, the one who wrote the Forgotten Realms, Dungeons and Dragons sort of series. And why I'm rereading that is partly because sometimes I'm reading things to sort of emulate them, and sometimes I'm reading things to sort of like shift them a little bit. And like one of the things growing up, I loved the series, I really did, but like Drizzt, the main character, is a dark elf who's like the only good guy of his race. Like everybody else is evil, and he's this one dark elf who like, he's one of the good ones, and so, I understand, I love the banter and things like that in that particular series, but I also am reading it to like see, okay, this is what people typically think of when they think of fantasy. So now when they read mine, I need to write mine in such a way as to reveal how it's different from the sort of typical fantasy novels. But those are a few of the books that I've been reading and enjoying lately. Also, I mean, Dune, with its sort of Islamic, parallels, which is of course more of like a corrupted, like Islam that got forgotten through millennia kind of Islam, but still the way that Frank Herbert sort of incorporated Islamic philosophical concepts is very interesting, and I've definitely been enjoying some Dune as well.
Yeah.
But I'd say Terry Pratchett though would be my number one. He writes in a way that makes like it's a very warm, like you feel the humanity of all the characters, even when most of them aren't human, but you still feel like how what they're going through and what's going on in their lives. So that's one thing I really love.
Oh, great. Well, thank you for being on our podcast, and love this conversation, and good luck with your future works and all of that. And we look forward to all of it.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so appreciative of you guys having me on here, and I'm glad to meet some of y'all after being online friends or whatever.
I know.
But good to meet y'all, and I would definitely love it if y'all can put a review down on
yes, definitely. I'll do that right now.
If you've read it fully and if you enjoy it, But that's great to meet you guys, and definitely let's keep in touch and keep supporting each other. I love what you guys are doing. Like, I'm glad to see a religiously nerdy podcast out there.
Yes.
Thank you.
And also, as like a little plug, we all can't make it because we're all everywhere right now. But I'll be representing Religiously Nerdy at New York Comic-Con come next month. So that's exciting.
So awesome.
That's awesome. Have a great time.
I hope to do so. It's been a minute
Yeah,
since I've
unfortunately,
been to a
some
con.
of us can't go, unfortunately, but we're gonna be rooting for you.
Thank you. Fight for
Yeah.
you.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right. Bye. Sounds
All right.
good.
Take care,
Nice
everybody.
meeting
You
you.
too.
No problem.